Finally got around to this one. It took me a while to decide what I wanted to do with this one because, quite frankly, the way this is set up, it's kind of like reenacting the actions of a previous party that's being played by a different group of RPG players and using their actions as backstory for something new that you're doing. Also, the screwball part with this one is that they use this as a way to unmystery box certain things, except only a few things. Like one, they were making it a big mystery of like why the coven existed and stuff and so forth on, and we find out that it was actually rather boring. So this is one of those things where I mentioned in the video I did about episode 3 that the big backstory lore dump via flashback scene doesn't work as a storytelling device in a TTRPG when the players aren't going to be doing things. And in fairness, a lot of this episode kind of feels like someone rolled dice to decide the outcome of events. Like, what happens to the fortress? Why does something happen to the fortress? Well, let's see here. Oh, we rolled a critical fail, and the critical fail table. Let's see. Roll for what the nature of the critical fail, and oh, the wall bursts into flames and the base explodes. Huh. Wonder how that happens. Oh well, that's what happened. Yeah, that's one of those things where, as a storytelling device in a TTRPG, rolling for random nonsense works when it's not a backstory. Rolling for random nonsense for something that already happened is something that needs to be done very sparingly and carefully. Because you could have something that creates a plot flaw. And in this episode, it raises a lot of questions that people hadn't thought about asking earlier. Like one, this base has enough working hardware in it that Kelnaka is able to use what in Star Wars is called slicing, i.e., um, unauthorized digital access to a computer system. In real world, we would call it hacking, but in Star Wars, it's one could argue that maybe it's a more specific term than hacking because the fact that slicing is requires physical access to the computer. At any rate, though, having Kelnaka be the guy that does it is a bit on the nose because that's kind of a thing that Chewbacca did. I probably mentioned that earlier when I was talking about Kelnaka in one of the other videos. But Kelnaka is basically what if Chewbacca could use the Force and was trained as a Jedi. He's in many ways very much just um, another Chewbacca. Um, so things that happen. It starts off by showing the what is the equivalent of a party of player characters, which realistically, like I said before, is that you're acting out a flashback, having the players make decisions in a flashback. Okay, you would have to set up the story in a way that the players can't actually change the story no matter what they do. And if you have players that want to sideline the story because they know or have guessed where you're going, could be a problem. However, in some TTRPG groups, the players will just play along with it and have fun and, whatever. Anyways, so that's one of those things to this I was talking about earlier is that when in the episode 3 one is that I don't personally like the idea of doing giant exposition dumps like this, especially when it's hidden information. It just, in my opinion, works better to have, you know, bits and pieces of background information, which can actually build tension quite well because you give people pieces that don't necessarily fit together immediately. Like, to use a jigsaw analogy, you give people a handful of pieces from the center of the jigsaw, one or two pieces from the right side of the edge, one or two pieces from the left side of the edge, none of which actually fit together. And it causes them to have more questions than answers because what they're given doesn't immediately just snap into place. Now, of course, you can have players who try to force it to snap into place and thus end up with a jigsaw that's out of shape and doesn't actually show you what the true picture is. But, player's going to do weird, random stuff. Anyways, so another thing about this that's kind of weird and is something that players would question if you had this as an actual plot point in a TTRPG. In the episode, Torben complains about the food because it's um basically just MRE version of Nuna meat, and these are featherless, flightless birds from Naboo, and the Jedi have given them rations made out of that. Okay, honestly, that is fine and logical. The thing with this that's weird, though, is that in this series, it has been established that you can just fly back to Coruscant via hyperspace in a matter of minutes, if or hours. They don't actually say how long it takes, but it feels very, very quick whenever they do it. Which makes me question why they can't just go back to Coruscant and chill for a few hours, and then go back to um, what's this planet called again? Brendok. See, an aspect of this that as a plot device in a TTRPG, you would need to have a logical explanation for it, not just the Jedi Council said so. Now, possible explanations would be, if there are pirates in the area, you want to have less travel being done because you don't want the pirates to notice what you're doing. That's something you could put in as an explanation. They don't, but it's something that could, in theory, be put in as an explanation for why you don't want to use hyperspace travel when you can. Also, as I mentioned on the video I made talking about Brendok, having Brendok be rendered lifeless by the hyperspace disaster is weird. Like, yes, that did heavy damage to a lot of places, but it didn't fully render planets lifeless, usually. And the idea that the mining colony thing was abandoned because of the hyperspace disaster kind of logically makes sense. Why the miners completely abandoned the place and never came back? Good question. However, you could put in something like the mine wasn't actually all of that popular or profitable or something, so that the people running the mine were actually thinking about abandoning it anyways. So it gets affected by the hyperspace disaster. The miners working there are killed, and then they just write the whole place off and like, oh well, I guess we don't have to spend money on that anymore. Could be done. In the episode, they actually never explain why the mining colony was abandoned. They just leave people to wonder about it. They don't even explain who built the mining colony, although all of the buildings and things inside it are sized appropriately for humans, so a race similar to humans, if not humans. Could be one of those weirdly multiracial things that Star Wars often does, where you have a whole bunch of people who are here for one reason only, and it's money, and are being paid to do mining, and the people doing the mining, or people paying people to do mining, don't really care who they pay. So you have a mixture of several different races because that's just who signed up for to work the job. Eh. Okay, so I talked about the Bread Dock Fortress thing and nothing about Bread Dock. I hate that feature. Um, it's a very big place. Like when you look at this is a picture that just gives you an idea as to just the size of it. Because like this is just the exterior. The interior is quite extensive as well. The logic for that, good question. Don't know. But yeah, the Brindok Coven for however many years has been living here, and no one apparently knows they're there. Because, like I mentioned in the previous video, the Jedi, when they realized the planet was no longer lifeless, apparently didn't realize there was any people here. And while they probably knew that the mining base existed, they apparently were under the impression that it was abandoned. They didn't look, seemingly, because, well, it's like I showed in this. It's like, this is what it looks like at night. It's lit up. It's not, dark. I, uh, I would have serious questions about whether that was in fact actually abandoned if I looked at that. Anyways, oh, this is something interesting. One thing that got brought up a few times is the question of whether or not the Coven are in fact actually Night Sisters, and yeah, that's a really weird thing that's kind of strange is that they try to play it off as if the Coven are something different from Night Sisters while doing more or less the same thing as Night Sisters. The idea seems to be that it's a similar um, type of Force cult, but a different specific implementation of it. Now, one thing I noticed about this that's very interesting is that the witches, because of the fact that they hate Jedi and they set up their base here because they don't want to be anywhere near Jedi, are extremely unhappy to have Jedi visiting them. However, they antagonize the Jedi when they don't need to and uh, make things worse and give the Jedi a reason to look around because they're just that annoying. That's a weird thing. Is that like they make a big deal about how we are not going to take your children. However, we will ask your children nicely if your children want to come with us. And It's set up as if they can simply say no, and then the Jedi will leave and leave them alone. I mean, we know Soul doesn't want to, like, really, really doesn't want to. And I have to question whether or not the whole virgins thing would have been adequately resolved simply by taking their um, medical scan results back to the Jedi Council. I mean, because as Torben said, they've been on there for a few weeks, cataloging various anomalies with the life forms and stuff. And I'm going to guess that the location that the Jedi landed their spaceship for their base of operations while they're here is a relatively large distance from the fortress, which is why when Torben goes there, he needs to use a speeder to get there quickly because of the fact that it's far enough away that he can't just walk. So, okay, in theory, maybe you could say that the Jedi landed someplace and just didn't notice. Like they did a perception roll and failed their perception roll to notice the fact that there's a lit up fortress on the horizon. Eh, see, from a TTRPG standpoint, that actually works. Like I said before, a lot of the stuff in this episode kind of makes sense if you look at it from the perspective of a TTRPG and having random dice rolls determine what happens next in the story. It's not high art storytelling, but it can be amusing. Thing is, this is backstory. This isn't, random chaos that's currently playing out. This is explaining what happened previously to the people who were here earlier. You know what the end point is going to be, at least in large picture, vague terms. It's not uh, an unknown eventuality. Now, stuff like, which of the witches end up dead, and specific details like that are not given. So there are certain things where there's room for um, variation. Because like there are 6 or 7 different ways a certain thing can go down. It's like everyone but May and O should die, and blah 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 blah. Okay, we actually know because the out of universe creator commentary that Coral isn't dead. Yeah, she's been playing dead for something like 20 years or hiding somewhere. We don't know where. But Coral wasn't in the scene where they had a whole bunch of dead witches. In fact, only something like a quarter of the coven was actually shown dead. Yeah, that's a plot point that's rather relevant currently is that they don't actually show the Jedi killing the entire coven. They mention they kind of say that they think they're all dead, but some of them are apparently shown using a sort of forced teleportation instead of actually being dead. And I feel that that's an important distinction because, in true TRPG fashion, you can basically do things like have players do a perception roll, like, oh, you believe that you have found all of the corpses of the enemies that you were fighting, and have and believe that you have accounted for all of them, and don't see any sign that any of them have escaped. And of course, you rolled a nat one and didn't actually accomplish any of what you think you accomplished. Blah 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 blah. Well, here's the thing. Um, like I said before, this is backstory, not current events. You, as the person running the game need to ensure that the backstory that you are having the players act out doesn't go off the rails. Which, as I mentioned before, is that there's things you can do there, but whatever. Anyways, so the idea that May and Osha are actually the same being that somehow split into two bodies gets explicitly brought up here. Now, I mentioned that before in the May Osha thing is that they don't really go into a whole lot of depth with this. I suspect that this is because the fact that the people writing the script didn't actually have that in the original version of the script and kind of like had to come up with something to explain why having them be twins was that special. But I'm not sure if that's actually what happened or if it just feels like it. Anyway, though, the Jedi Council was generally opposed to the idea of forcing the Coven to do things because, as I mentioned earlier in one of the other videos, the Coven is technically on a planet that's outside Republic space, so the Jedi Council actually don't have authority to order them to do anything. It's one of the things that's a weird technicality is that you have limited authority to do things. You don't have caveat to do anything and everything you want. And they were outside their bounds. Now, notably, because of the fact that the planet was believed to be uninhabited, that originally gave them a lot more leeway to do things. Because if no one else is claiming the planet, then they can't tell you, get out, this is ours. However, when they find out that it is in fact occupied, well, that means that the people occupying it can tell them to get out because this is ours. Anyway, so a lot of the things that go down here are basically just like random plot conveniences because there's several things about this that you have a whole bunch of random people doing random things, and a lot of it feels like what I was talking about earlier, where someone rolled a dice to decide what happens. Honestly, coming up with a random nonsense table to have all of these possible things in it would be rather entertaining to just to see someone work out all of that stuff. It's like I said before, it's like lighting a book on fire and then having the fire somehow catch the wall on fire and then cause the main reactor powering the base to explode. That is some really, really bizarre random nonsense rolls. Like a catastrophic failure on a fumble or something. Like, what? Anyways, then you get to the part where they have the actual fight. More random nonsense happens, like Coral mind controlling Kelnaka. I mean, this had happened previously with Torben, so we already knew that the witches could do that. Just, yeah, Kelnaka wasn't even in the building when they did that to Kelnaka. That's the part about it that's weird. Whatever. Then again, it could be that they hit Kelnaka with it right when he was about to enter the building. That would make some sense, anyways. Again, this is one of those things where there's certain aspects of it that are salvageable and a whole bunch that are just dumb. And honestly, in a TTRPG, dumb stuff will happen because one, the outcome is partially random, and two, players may not want to do what you think they're supposed to do. And another thing that I've seen mentioned quite a lot is the ending here feels like the sort of thing where the players went off the rails and the GM wanted a different ending to happen, and the um closing minute or so of the actual episode is like GM fiat saying like, yes, 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 this happened, that happened, the other thing happened, but it was all fine in the end, and nothing of importance was lost because they're patching things over so that the story continues as it's supposed to, rather than actually following up on what the players did. Because to be honest, though, it's like the entire plot of this is actually rooted in the fact that the Coven on Brendok died. That was actually a key plot point. It's just because, like, that's actually May's entire motive for wanting to kill Soul was the fact that she held Soul responsible for the death of Anasaya. Well, I mean, he did actually kill her. He kind of had a reason for it, but Anyway, though, and this here is another thing that just like feels like random nonsense. He's like, oh no, I can't do everything, so I'll only do one or two of the things, which happens to be right at this same time that the base generator exploded. Which again, it feels like someone's just like rolling dice to decide which specific thing will cause the things to go worse. Boy. Anyway, though, and yeah, it's a very I can't call it good. I really can't call this good. Amusing, sure. Good, no. But it's amusing in a way where I could see someone using this as ideas. It's not something that's just like completely out of the pale, uh, useless from a storytelling perspective, but it's something we need to think about how you want to use it carefully. And I guess I'll end it here. The finale episode of this gets even stupider, and genuinely felt like the people writing this show had no idea how to end things, and so they just went random bullshit go, and just used that as an ending instead of having something that was actually carefully thought out. Which, to a certain extent, they actually admitted to because of the fact that they talked about how many times they rewrote the way it ended. Ah, boy. And honestly, the whole like changing the script while filming does in some way mimic the way having your carefully thought out module get turned sideways by the players doing things you didn't expect them to do. There's a certain amount of um, poetry in the similarities there. Alrighty then. Well, with that thought, I will say you later.